Well, David, I just want to start by thanking you very much indeed for, at short notice, agreeing to share with us, so we can share with a conference coming up, some of the learning that's coming out of your really exciting innovative learning environments project. We're particularly pleased to have a chance to tap into this because of its strong focus on learning on environments and the international range, which I think is unparalleled, and the fact that it's been cumulative over a lot of years. So I guess the first big question is, what are the kind of learnings that are coming out of that project for you about professional growth, professional development, professional knowledge?
Well, I think the way that we've been thinking about learning environments and innovation in those learning environments in the project is, in a sense, an agenda for professional learning and professional growth itself. We started out by addressing the question of the nature of learning, research on learning, and of course with that the different teaching possibilities and pedagogies that can address the nature of learning. And therefore we started out with that, but it's clear to me that the understandings about how people learn and really applying the results of that very large and rich body of research is something that clearly defines an important agenda for professional learning itself. Secondly, we've developed a framework for learning environments which puts the nature of the design, the learning leadership, the design, and the learning from the learning that takes place, to the extent to which schools and different learning environments are themselves formative, not just formative classrooms, but the organizations are formative, and the room for influencing the shape of the learning environment very centrally in our project. And that also defines an important agenda for teacher learning and growth, because it's about how teachers can be part of learning leadership, can be part of really learning with others about the learning that's taking place in terms of the arrangements that there are, and how that learning environment can itself be improved and changed in the light of the results and the learning that's taking place. And the third part of that framework is very much about openness to partnerships, the readiness to embrace others in schools, and to work with others, and to have an understanding of the boundaries of the learning environment that can be actually quite flexible, depending, of course, on what those partnerships are. And there, I think, is a whole set of possibilities and opportunities for professional growth that partnership represents.
Fantastic. So it sounds to me as though by starting with the learning of the students and thinking deeply about that, you were getting to some underpinning principles. Did that play an important role in making sense of what was similar in different countries? Can you give us a couple of examples of how those similarities and differences helped you shape your model, or how the model helped you understand them? Well,
what we see is that those principles that come out of the research, and we came up with 7 we think are important. Firstly, about putting learning at the center and making learner engagement and the potential to develop in learners their own understandings of themselves as learners as a very important first principle. The recognition of the social nature of learning. Of course, some of it goes on inside our heads, but learning is by very nature a negotiation, and that is something, and often taking place with others. So the recognition of the importance of the social nature of learning. The third point is very much about recognizing the importance of the emotional element of learning, cognitive development, cognitive learning is very important, but the other side of the coin is our feelings about it, our motivations towards learning, our feelings of anxiety or our feelings of satisfaction or our feelings of being lost. Those emotions are an incredibly important part of the learning. A couple of the very difficult aspects, I think, of the research are about individual differentiation. We know that learners come into school with very different backgrounds, and how do we recognize those differences and really cater to those differences in a formative way? How do we build on strengths, and how do we recognize difficulties and so on? And the flip side of that, or another side of that, is the whole question of how to stretch all learners, but without there being excessive grind and overload. The sixth point that we identified is the key role of assessment, and that the importance of trying to create coherence between the assessment regime, the assessment, the evaluation methodologies, and what we're finding out about the learning, and what we're trying to do in the learning environment itself. How do you get greater coherence between the assessment, which is absolutely critical, and the learning process and developing that? We think that's a very important aspect. And then the seventh is very much about horizontality. How do you get away from the silos that we often are in education, whether it's in a class or in a subject? How do we build bridges so we recognize the importance of learning something specifically, but building bridges to connect that in larger ways? Say, for example, the learning episode to bigger concepts, or what's going on in one subject to another subject, the learning that's going on in school and out of school. So that horizontal connectedness is something that we think we should promote. So that's given a set of lenses through which to look at the different examples, and we think that those define, they're quite a demanding agenda, but nevertheless an important one.
Fantastic. So from that rich and very elegant setup, if you had the research funding bodies in front of you now and they were offering to fund your desert island piece of research, which of those topics that you've been working with do you think really we can push this forward if only we could research that more deeply, or if only the research community could help us with this? What would be your desert island?
Well, I think there'd be four, actually.
Oh, four, okay.
One is I do think the whole question of learning leadership is very important, and I think we are still in the process of clarifying it as a concept in this context of thinking of leadership as the design of learning environments. I think that's there's in both understanding the concept and in terms of different approaches that promote it positively. So that would be one. The whole question of evaluation, I think, is absolutely critical. If we are serious about schools as formative organizations, then what are appropriate evaluation methodologies? Often when there's not a very substantial evidence base, when an innovation has only started, what kind of methodologies are there? What kinds of iterative processes are there where one can learn as one goes along in the way that formative assessment is? So the whole question of evaluation, I think, is a critical one. Learning about the role of networks and communities of practice and how they work and don't work and can fit in, I think, would be very important. And the fourth one would be research on approaches to trying to make more coherent something that we've been talking about here at this seminar in Cambridge. How do we make more coherent our accountability demands and the arrangements for learning? How can we try and create more coherence without that being something that's very rigid? Nevertheless, how do we create greater coherence in that way?
Well, I'd sign up for your desert island. I think that's fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, David. That's really great.